Donald Trump claims he'd only be a dictator on day one of a potential second presidency. But a trusted advisor from his first term, Kash Patel, is already drawing up plans to go after his political enemies. And a potential second-term attorney general, Mike Davis, has already vowed to throw Trump's enemies in a gulag. Joining me now is Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal lawyer. He's now the principal of Crisis X. He's also the host of the Mea Culpa and Political Beatdown podcast and is the author of Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the Department of Justice Against His Critics. Michael, it is good to see you. I'm glad to get a chance to talk to you because you're one of the few people who's actually experienced being thrown in jail at the behest of Donald Trump. If you could just remind us of how that went down. You wrote a book, he didn't like it, and then what happened?
Yeah, then what happened was I was lured down to 500 Pearl Street, where I was asked to sign a document that was designed specifically for me that violated my First Amendment constitutional right. I was not permitted to speak to media. I couldn't write the book. I couldn't publish the book. I couldn't do work on movies. I couldn't speak to the press. It was a complete and total gag order. Well, when myself and my friend, who's a lawyer, Jeffrey K. Levine, turned around and said, hey, this is like a little overbroad and unconstitutional violation of my First Amendment right, they had 3 marshals waiting outside for me who ultimately remanded me, handcuffed and shackled, and remanded me back for another 16 days of solitary confinement at FCI Otisville. So I am the very first political prisoner held by this country because I refuse to waive my First Amendment constitutional right. And I've been yelling this from the rooftop now for 3 years, saying if they could do that to me, imagine what they can and will do to you. And unfortunately, we're at this point right now in American history.
Well, the thing is that, and I ask you that to start off, because I think that people still don't take Trump seriously. When he says, I'll only be a dictator on day one, people in the audience laughed. I noted also that when he said, I'll close the border and drill, they cheered. But the first thing that they did was when he said, I'll be a dictator on day one, someone in the audience screamed, yeah. And people in the audience seemed happy about it. So do you feel that at this point, it's one of two things? There are either people in this country who actually crave a dictator Trump and a president for life who is Donald Trump, or they just don't believe he'll do it?
Either way, it doesn't really work. First of all, if he's going to be a dictator on day one, rest assured, I know him better than almost anybody. He won't be a dictator on day two. He will be a king. He will make himself into the Fuhrer, and he will make everybody raise their hand and salute him, Heil Hitler, because that's what he is. That's what he wants. He is an autocratic wannabe with autocratic tendencies. I brought that lawsuit against the United States government simply because I am afraid. And I have said this both in my book, Revenge, publicly on this show with you, Joy. If they did it to me, imagine what they're going to do to you. He's already told people he's going to shut down this station. He wants to jail your president's CEO. He wants to execute Joint Chief of Staff Mark Milley. He wants to, execute Mike Pence. I mean, he's got a hit list of people. He wants to throw everyone into Gitmo. I mean, this is... It's hard to imagine that we're even having this conversation. This is exactly what our forefathers feared hundreds of years ago, that this would happen. And another thing that Donald has told us, again, this isn't me saying it, Joy. It's not you saying it. It's not Liz Cheney saying it. It is Donald Trump saying it when he says on the first day he wants to rewrite the Constitution. Seriously, he wants to strip the power of the judiciary and the legislature and confer all power to the executive branch. Again, that means to him, he wants the military to sign a loyalty oath to him. He wants the 1,600 people that will work for government in the transition team to sign a loyalty oath to him. The only person that asks for loyalty, especially in a loyalty oath, is a dictator, a supreme leader, a monarch, a Fuhrer.
And the reality is that was literally done In Venezuela, where Nicolas Maduro rewrote the constitution and the laws to make it illegal to run against him, to throw his opponents in jail, to shut down the media. This has happened in our hemisphere, and now he wants to invade Guyana because he wants to grab an oil region for himself. Let me read some polls to you. PRI, Public Religion Research Institute, probably the best pollster out there, they asked about support for authoritarianism in the direction of the country. All Americans saying Republicans, 48% would support an authoritarian in response to the direction the country is going. 38% of independents, even 29% of Democrats. PRI survey is political violence might be necessary to save our country. A third of Republicans said yes. 23% overall said yes, political violence might be necessary. Can you just sort of explain to people, as somebody who knows Trump personally, who knows the kinds of people who are around him, how realistic it is that Donald Trump would use violence to get back into office and to stay in office for life?
He'll do whatever it's necessary for him to take power. He will do whatever is necessary to get back into office, plain and simple. You know, whether it's through the usage of military or some other nefarious way, he will do whatever is necessary, because with Donald, it's all about winning. Despite the fact he's not winning, he hasn't been winning for several years now. That's his goal. He sees winning the White House back as the only means for him to stay relevant in order to be the rich businessman, the powerful businessman, the president of the United States. This is all that is on his mind. That's all that he's thinking of. He wants to use the presidency of the United States as a get-out-of-jail-free card.
And the reality is he's surrounded by not just people like Kash Patel, not just people like Steve Bannon, who has his own designs on being the apparatchik to a dictator, but people like Kevin McCarthy, who's now leaving. He's leaving the Congress. But before he left, when he was actually the Speaker of the House of Representatives, this is somebody who presided over taking the non-red and pink M&Ms out of Donald Trump's bag of not M&Ms, of Starbursts, because he knew Donald Trump didn't like them. He had no dignity. You can see him there going to bend the knee to Trump after January 6th. So somebody, a normie like Kevin McCarthy, would be willing to bend the knee. Can you think of any Republicans who would resist if Donald Trump got in and then said, you know what, we're just not going to have the next election, I'm staying?
Yeah, I think certainly Chris Christie. I think there are plenty of Republicans that do not want to see the United States lose its Constitution or democracy. I can't imagine that there's an American out there that wants an authoritarian ruler in running this country. It makes absolutely no sense. It's what makes America great. Not Donald Trump, not authoritarianism, but our democracy and the Constitution. I mean, it's the second greatest document ever written to, to the Ten Commandments. I mean, come on, let's be serious. That is the most important document, not just for the United States, but for the whole world. I've said it a million times. If you have a strong America, you will have a strong world. If you have a weak America, you will have a weak world. And, you used, I forget which country that you used as the example. I always use Russia because that's what Donald wants to be. Now, they may have their constitution and they don't want to call themselves an authoritarian country, but that's exactly what it is. And what's happened to people like Navalny? Anybody that crosses Putin either ends up in prison or somehow, for whatever the reason, jumping out of a window. This is exactly what we're all going to be experiencing if, God forbid, a million times Donald Trump returns to the White House.
And somebody who would know very well, because he knows Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, thank you very much. We always appreciate your time.